Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 83, Meno 73a to c. Meno's answer about virtue had listed tasks appropriate to various types of people according to age, gender, and social status. When talking about the virtue of the woman, he had also mentioned, apart from the role to manage the household, the way she should manage the household. In other words, he added the adverb well. In his response, Socrates had made the virtue of the man parallel the virtue of the woman by saying that the man too managed the city well, which is not what Meno had said. Socrates has now split the adverb well into two adverbs, justly and with sound mind, or with self-control, and he has used two adverbs. Considering that Socrates is looking for the one virtue, it's interesting that it's he himself who has split well into two adverbs. It's also interesting that Meno agrees with him that a man or a woman cannot manage well if not justly and with self-control or sound-mindedness. Socrates now pushes this one step further. Ukun anper dikaios kai sophronos dioikosin, dikaiosune kai sophrosune dioikesusin, ananke. Well then, if indeed they manage justly and sound-mindedly, they will manage with justice and sound-mindedness, necessarily. Socrates has replaced the adverbs with nouns in the dative case, which is a common alternative in Greek to the use of adverbs. Sometimes a noun in the dative case is used where there is no adverb, but it still describes an action. For example, someone kills somebody else with a sword. The sword will be in the dative case. In English, we use a variety of prepositions with nouns. For example, in, by, with, by means of, and occasionally the usage of the dative in Greek is ambiguous, but it always describes the action in some way or another. Meno strongly agrees with Socrates' question because it is unremarkable in Greek. An adverb is equivalent to a noun in the dative case. Socrates continues, Ton auton ara amphotoroi deontai eper melus sin agathoienai kai hegune kai ho aner dikaiosunes kai sophrosunes. Phainontai. So they both need the same things, if indeed they're going to be good, both the woman and the man, namely justice and sound-mindedness. They appear to do so. There was no need for Socrates to split well into two different adverbs, justly and with sound mind, simply in order to observe that this was a necessary feature of all types of arete. But by turning the adverb into two nouns, he has made the concept more concrete for Meno, who does think in concrete terms. These are things shared by man and woman in their respective virtues. And this is the second point, that instead of talking about virtue, he now says, if indeed they are going to be good. In other words, Socrates himself knows that arete is the characteristic of good things, which belies his claim that he knows absolutely nothing about virtue. We may ask ourselves why Socrates went to the effort of finding two nouns. Why didn't he just make the noun which is analogous to well? Now, the noun analogous to well is by virtue. In other words, arete in the dative case. Socrates would then have been saying that arete is to do something with arete. He has simply concealed this problem by converting with arete into justly and with sound mind. The argument is logically unsound, but psychologically perhaps we can say it is exactly what Meno needs, because it concentrates his mind on how something is done rather than what is done. Meno had mentioned other types of people apart from man and woman, and Socrates now extends the argument to some of these. Tide pais kai presbutes mon akolastoi ontes kai adikoi agathoi an pote genointo udeta. What then? A child and an old man, being lacking in self-control and unjust, surely they would never become good? No, certainly not. Socrates had fabricated a parallel between the virtue of a man and the virtue of a woman, which Meno hadn't made. Socrates, claimed that the virtue of a man was to manage a polis, just as the woman managed the household. Now, he couldn't say that about a child or an old man. They don't manage things. But by now, Socrates has dropped the entire notion of managing from the virtue of men and women as well. So the argument seems to follow, because he's concentrating only on how they do things. With the men and women, he emphasizes that they do things justly and with self-control. And recently he's been using the nouns with justice and with self-control. But now, with the child and the old man, he simply uses adjectives, but chooses to use the opposite of just and self-controlled. So he uses unjust and an adjective which literally means unpunished, but it also comes to mean undisciplined, lacking self-control. The adjective good has already been introduced in the previous statement, that a man and a woman would only be good if they have justice and self-control. It's interesting that Socrates chooses to use the negative adjectives before turning to the positive adjectives, just and self-controlled, which is what he does now. Ala sophrones kai dikaioi nai, but they are self-controlled and just, yes. Apart from anything else, we have been given a lesson in connecting between adverbs, nouns in the dative case, and adjectives, while the contrary of dikaios, just, is adikos, unjust. They sound very similar. The contrary of sophron, self-controlled, is not aphron, which is also a contrary of sophron, but akolastos, literally unpunished, but also undisciplined, lacking self-control. The cumulative effect of all of this terminology is to draw attention to how things are done and not what roles each particular type of person should have. If Meno had been following the argument, he would already realize that the role doesn't matter if it is done unjustly, without self-control, and basically without arete. We will see soon enough that Meno isn't following the argument. Socrates now concludes, Pantes ar anthropoi to autotropo agathoiesin, ton auton gar tu hontes agathoi gignontai. Eoike. Therefore, all humans are good in the same way. For acquiring the same things, they become good. And Meno replies, so it seems. Meno could be forgiven for thinking that Socrates is claiming that all humans are good. But what he's actually saying is that if they are good in the same way. All good people are good in the same way. And it's interesting that Socrates didn't say this. He could have said, all good people are good in the same way. He's already used that sort of formulation in previous dialogues. This contradicts Meno's previous answer in which there were many types of virtue. Now it appears that there is only one virtue which all good people have. And we may incidentally remark that Meno hadn't made the connection between arete and good people in his answer. It may have been understood, but he didn't make it explicit. Since Meno seems to be a bit hesitant, Socrates explains to him why this conclusion must follow. Uk antepu, ege me he aute arete en auton, to auto anthropo, agathoi esan, udeta. For they wouldn't be good in the same way if the same arete wasn't of all of them. And Meno replies, surprisingly emphatically, no, not at all, as if he doesn't mind that this conclusion completely contradicts his original answer. Meno had given a list of virtues which were roles appropriate to types of people according to age, gender, and social status. The virtue of a man is to do the things of the polis. It wasn't managing the polis, it was simply doing the things of the polis, and while doing so, benefiting friends and harming enemies. And the virtue of a woman was to manage the household well. It was Meno who added the adverb well. So when Socrates picks up on the notion of how a role should be done, and it's Meno who connects arete with well, with goodness, Socrates isn't actually imposing a new idea on Meno. This is an idea which Meno already had, which contradicted the other idea of arete.